Who are some of the wildest CEOs out there? Let's get right to it and start with number 4, Dov Charney. By the late 2000s, Dov Charney was worth over $700 million. He grew his fortune from American Apparel, a clothing company he founded in 1998. However, just a few years later, in 2013, his 9-figure stake in American Apparel fell by 96% to $23 million. It was one of the biggest corporate failures in history. Most of the problems that led to American Apparel's downfall were caused by Charney himself and his scandalous behavior. American Apparel originally started out as a wholesale business in Los Angeles. For 5 years, Charney ran his wholesale business until 2003, when he opened the first original American Apparel store on the iconic Sunset Boulevard. Normally, Sunset Boulevard is a bustling fashion area, but Charney couldn't afford to set up shop in a glitzy section of the street, so he settled for Echo Park, an unpopular neighborhood east of the Sunset Strip. In spite of the rough start, Charney's first American Apparel store was a surprise hit. The store offered a unique product for the time: logoless, locally made clothing, not the logo-obsessed garb made in sweatshops. Charney also paid his employees well. Workers could expect to earn $12 per hour, which was well above the minimum wage at the time. Of course, high pay yielded high expectations, and Charney's factory soon became one of the most productive in the world. With his business model in full swing, Charney started cranking out as many products as he could. His flagship factory, at its peak, was producing more clothes than any other factory in America. It was a massive 7-story structure, manned by over 3,000 workers, all working to help maintain the company's ridiculous expansion rate. Charney was relentless when it came to growing American Apparel. He drove his factories and their small city-sized cohort of workers to produce 1 million pieces of clothing each and every week. They produced leggings, dresses, socks, underwear, swimwear, shorts, and of course, their signature t-shirts. These items came in over 31,000 different styles and colors. Customers loved the variety, the authenticity, and the relative affordability. So much so that by 2005, just 2 years after the first store opened its doors in 2003, American Apparel was operating 50 stores across 5 different countries. Their sales eventually exceeded $250 million. Leading the company to decide it was time to go public in 2007. The move couldn't have come at a better or worse time. The market was still optimistic, and Wall Street had high expectations for the everyman fashion company. A few months after going public, American Apparel's stock rose to $15.50 per share. By that point, the company was worth $2.7 billion. And with a 27% stake, Charney found himself a very wealthy man, worth around $730 million at the stock's peak. It's safe to say Charney was riding high at this point in his life. Charney was so confident in his future that he predicted he would be LA's next billionaire. As it turned out, Charney would have been far more accurate if he predicted he'd be LA's next Harvey Weinstein. Throughout his time as CEO of American Apparel, Charney was involved in several scandals, from within the workplace and beyond. According to people that worked at the American Apparel offices, Charney would often walk around the workplace in his underwear and, as some claim, wore nothing at all during job interviews. To make himself seem cool around his employees, Charney supposedly also used a certain substance, the type that goes up the nose, right in front of his employees. The stories only get crazier. One claim suggests Charney kidnapped an employee and held them captive at his house for an unknown amount of time. Besides the bizarre and possibly Criminal Minds-esque treatment of his employees, Charney's personality also leaked out to the public on occasion. You may remember seeing American Apparel billboards with models dressed in inappropriate clothing. These ads were championed by Charney, who was trying to sell to everyone. His relationship with the media was just as odd. In the middle of an interview with a reporter from Jane magazine, Charney asked her if she would be alright with him quote-unquote pleasing himself for the rest of the interview. The reporter Claudine Coe gave Charney her consent, possibly thinking it was a joke. Charney accepted and started doing exactly what you think he was doing, all while Coe continued the interview as if everything was normal. Charney allegedly took things even further by continuing with an employee in front of Coe as the interview continued. The shocking behavior of Charney was apparently so prevalent that the company included it in the documents they signed in employee contracts. The document itself simply acknowledged that American Apparel, or at least the corporate office had a culture that encouraged physical urges. That culture eventually resulted in Charney getting 2 different harassment lawsuits. The first lawsuit was dismissed, but the second lawsuit, which was filed by a former employee against Charney for creating a hostile working environment, resulted in a $1.3 million settlement. The employee got the money, and in exchange, American Apparel was relieved of any liability for the harassment. Despite the public scandals, American Apparel collapsed due to Charney's financial recklessness, and somehow not his quest to commit nearly every type of harassment in the book. American Apparel had spent much of their shareholders' money on operating 100 more stores. Then, 2008 happened, and suddenly, millions of people couldn't afford to buy copious amounts of brand-name clothes. The company was also hit with an immigration audit, leading to many of their illegal workers quitting the company amongst fears of deportation. Without their small army of employees, American Apparel experienced a major supply shortage. The money problems continued all the way into 2013, and Charney continued to fail at solving them. Eventually, American Apparel couldn't even pay their loans without selling shares. Even Charney had to sell his shares to keep the company afloat. The move looked bad to shareholders, who lost all confidence in the company. And by all confidence, we mean all confidence. Almost every shareholder, big and small, followed a mass exodus of American Apparel. That exodus nearly destroyed the company. They went from being a multi-billion-dollar corporation to a $95 million one. And Charney went from almost becoming LA's next billionaire to just another millionaire, worth roughly $23 million. Number 3. Andrew Mason. If there were a prize for the weirdest CEO in America, Groupon founder Andrew Mason would win every year. In fact, he'd probably be the chairman of the award committee. Initially, Mason's antics were viewed as the eccentric behavior of a genius businessman. But over time, the company's shareholders realized Mason's weirdness was affecting the company in a negative way, like the self-destructive kind of negative. Mason was eventually fired from Groupon after their stock fell 77% in 2013. A big chunk of the price drop came from the end of 2012, when the company reported they'd lost $81 million in net loss. That day, investors shut off so much stock that Groupon's price dropped 24%. It's very rare, in a bad way, for a stock to lose 24% of its value in a single trading day. Oddly enough, the most bizarre moment came when Mason issued his formal statement on being fired, mostly because it was anything but formal. Mason started the statement off with this brilliant prose. After 4.5 intense and wonderful years as CEO of Groupon, I've decided that I'd like to spend more time with my family. Just kidding, I was fired today. The public made fun of his response and treated him more like a disgraced CEO than a misunderstood genius. But as we mentioned earlier, it wasn't always like that. Back in 2008, Mason was a respected, even revered entrepreneur. His idea was innovative, and Wall Street Journal predicted Groupon would reach over $1 billion in sales in record time. Back then, it was okay for Mason to be a little weird, even though little weird might be an understatement. Mason ran a blog where he shared his thoughts on various topics, and even published some poetry. One of his poems criticized how companies take advantage of the supply and demand dynamic. The poem uses a vending machine selling out of a new product, then waiting over 3 weeks to restock, as a metaphor for bad customer relations. Mason also shared his opinions on friendship in another post. He started off on a positive note with the statement, quote, "Having friends is important. If you have friends, that means you are not insufferable," which sounds like a clever Mark Twain quote until Mason went on tangent. "Make sure you meet the friends of your friends," he wrote. "If you can't stand any of them, then your friend has poor taste and their validation does you no good. Move on." Then, he concluded with his own personal advice, which was, save energy by befriending people that have no other friends. Most writers would have reread the piece and decided not all their opinions should be shared online, but not Mason. Mason was also reckless about videos he posted. One day, out of the blue, and for no particular reason, Mason posted a video of himself performing yoga in his underwear. Still, neither the video nor the weird blog posts got him into any serious trouble. But one of the strangest and most controversial things Mason did was reject Google's acquisition offer in November of 2010. That offer was for $6 billion. That was a large sum of money for a 2-year-old company that was already having earnings troubles. Groupon was a popular idea at the time, and Google wanted it badly. Mason could have possibly negotiated an even higher price, but to everyone in the tech world's surprise, he declined their offer. In hindsight, Mason would have been better off managing the money from Google because he couldn't manage Groupon's money as CEO. In the corporate structure, a CEO has one main objective: keep the stakeholders happy. A company's two primary stakeholders are its customers and, of course, their shareholders, the individuals who own a piece of the company. Shareholders like to see profits, and to put it simply, Mason wasn't giving them any. The operational aspects of Groupon were an absolute mess. There were also major issues with Groupon's accounting department that he never solved, which led to the gutting losses in 2012 and 2013. All in all, Mason had a good idea and was a good programmer, but a truly awful CEO. Number 2. Elizabeth Holmes. Elizabeth Holmes' name was synonymous with intelligence, success, and entrepreneurship. In recent months, however, she's become the symbol of corporate corruption, especially with the too good to be true public personas of the tech industry's celebrity CEOs. Holmes founded her now infamous company Theranos while she was still in college at Stanford, where she was studying chemical engineering. Initially, she'd planned on being a surgeon like her great-great-grandfather, who she admired growing up. However, Holmes' fear of needles kept her from pursuing any career in the needle-heavy medical field. While Holmes wasn't totally sure what she wanted to do with her life, she knew she wanted a complex career in a complex and challenging field. She chose engineering, one of the most challenging professional fields in the world. It requires extremely hard work and high levels of intelligence. And despite all the comments attacking her character, Elizabeth Holmes was a hard-working person. She developed her high-octane work ethic in school, where she consistently got good grades. Grades that got her into Stanford's chemical engineering program, one of the most prestigious programs in the United States. In her freshman year, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed Holmes earned a $3,000 stipend for a research project after becoming an official President's Scholar. To further her studies, Holmes studied at an institute in Singapore, a position she got mostly due to the fact she could speak fluent Mandarin. Holmes returned from Singapore for her sophomore year with an idea for a company. She presented her idea to her professor, who gave her the go-ahead to start with a company she'd named Real-Time Cures. She later changed the company name to Theranos, but not before early employees were sent checks with a typo that read Real-Time Curses. Holmes proceeded to go through all the motions startups must go through, things like filing for patents and finding investors. You've probably seen shows like Shark Tank, where entrepreneurs ask 4 celebrity business people for startup capital. 3 things usually happen on Shark Tank. The entrepreneur talks about how they've given their whole life to the company. The sharks ask if they have a patent and end up giving the company capital under $500,000. Holmes was certainly giving her life to Theranos. She had dropped out of Stanford, trading the old university halls for the basement of her college house. As for the patent, Holmes was filing for a piece of technology that no one had seen before. Holmes' invention was a wearable device that could administer medicine while monitoring the wearer's blood metrics and give dosages based on said metrics. The device could test the patient's blood with only a small finger prick instead of a traditional needle. Holmes had plenty of motivation to make needles obsolete, given her phobia of pointy medical equipment. She claimed her device could detect conditions such as high cholesterol and even cancer. Holmes' device was so incredible, and her marketing even more so, that Theranos caught the attention of several high-profile investors. Holmes was able to land major appearances on the tech convention circuit. It wasn't long before Holmes, her device, and the name Theranos became well known amongst investors and venture capitalists. Eventually, Holmes managed to secure investments from high-profile names like Larry Ellison, the founder of Oracle, and the venture capitalist Tim Draper, totaling a staggering $700 million in starting capital. The investors assumed they were getting in early on a potentially game-changing innovation in the biomedical field. But there was a catch. Holmes didn't have to say how Theranos worked, only what it did. In other words, Theranos might as well have been science fiction to the investors who gave Holmes millions of dollars in capital. Holmes also had a stipulation that she would have full control of the company, no matter how much money the investors chucked out. She also demanded full control over the information held within the company. Put another way, Holmes didn't want anyone, even investors, to know what was going on inside Theranos. So much so that Holmes sued 3 employees for leaking information. Her style of corporate governance was similar to Steve Jobs, Holmes' role model for what a Silicon Valley CEO should be. She even started dressing like Jobs, wearing his signature black turtlenecks. Her office was decorated like his office, and Holmes never took vacations, just like Jobs did. She even tried talking like a man. During public appearances, and even in the office, Holmes spoke in a noticeably deeper tone. She supposedly did this to fit in with the male-dominated industry in Silicon Valley. Former employees say it was all an act, and that Holmes would lose the deep voice when she got drunk or giggly. Holmes played this character for years to dazzle tech consumers, enthusiasts, and investors, and it worked for the most part. Theranos was a machine driven by Holmes, who, like her idol Steve Jobs, pushed her employees as far as they'd go. Holmes monitored when her employees walked into the office and when they walked out. To encourage them to stay longer, Holmes resorted to catering for the entire office after 8 p.m. Despite her work ethic, the Theranos board of directors wasn't always confident that Holmes could do the job correctly. In 2008, the board attempted to fire her as CEO, but in an in-person meeting that lasted 2 hours, Holmes managed to convince them she was right for the job. To prove herself, Holmes went and secured several partnerships with other companies in the medical industry, such as the Cleveland Clinic and Walgreens. Walgreens actually agreed to install Theranos blood testing centers in most of their stores. With all the deals and investor support, Theranos became a multi-billion-dollar company and made Holmes the world's youngest self-made billionaire. Meanwhile, Holmes was continuing her tight-gripped reign of Theranos. Security protocols were so strict that visitors were only allowed inside company headquarters with a security guard, even if they had to go to the bathroom. And if you wanted to work for Theranos, you had to sign an NDA. Oddly enough, Holmes hired her own brother to work at Theranos. Her brother, in turn, began hiring his own friends to come work for him, who were unaffectionately referred to as the Therabros. Still, her brother and his frat brothers never revealed Theranos' biggest secret, the secret Holmes had been trying to protect for the past few years. Scientists, including the scientists who worked at Theranos, didn't trust Holmes' new technology. Ian Gibbons, the former chief scientist at Theranos, advised Holmes to hold off until the product was ready. He warned that the tests weren't ready for people to take, that they couldn't actually detect the conditions Holmes was claiming they could. In 2015, a journalist for the Wall Street Journal investigated Theranos and found that the company's test results were only partially accurate. The FDA also conducted their own investigation at this time. They discovered that Edison, the name of Theranos' machine, couldn't give accurate test results compared to other, more mainstream machines. These investigations eventually got the attention of the SEC. Since millions of investor dollars were in what appeared to be a faulty product, this was now a financial criminal investigation. As authorities investigated Holmes, Theranos patients were catching on. By 2019, Holmes was neck-deep in lawsuits, and without one of her lawyers, who left because Holmes hadn't paid him in months. Eventually, the feds built a case against her, and Holmes had to make one last stand in the courtroom. She had no money, no control, and no power. Her only goal was to stay out of prison. Holmes and her legal team used several different defenses, but none of them convinced the jury. The former CEO was found guilty of wire fraud and a few other fraud-related charges. The judge later sentenced Holmes to 11 years behind bars. For a much deeper dive into Elizabeth Holmes and her strangeness, click the link here. Number 1. John Schnatter. Unlike the other CEOs on this list, John Schnatter actually ran his company pretty well. It was his mouth that got him into trouble. Schnatter famously grew Papa John's from a rinky-dink pizza shop in a basement to a massive billion-dollar chain restaurant. At the peak of Schnatter's tenure at Papa John's, the company operated 5,000 stores and raked in $1.7 billion in annual revenue, making them the fourth largest pizza chain in America. One aspect of Papa John's appeal was Schnatter's appearances on the company's commercials, where he'd say his famous slogan, "Better ingredients, better pizza, Papa John's." Schnatter's commercials gave his company an almost family-owned vibe, despite the fact that he was worth well over $900 million. As a CEO, he created the brand focused on quality, with himself as the face and voice of the company. Unfortunately, as the voice of Papa John's, Schnatter talked way too much. His first verbal mistake happened during the national anthem controversy back in 2016. Schnatter criticized the NFL NFL for allowing players to kneel during the anthem, emphasizing the impact it would have on Papa John's, a major sponsor of the Football League. That comment wasn't taken well by the public or Papa John's shareholders. The share price of Papa John's dropped 11% in one day, and Schnatter had to attend cleanup meetings with his PR team. Ironically, the meetings are what ultimately ended his career as the leader of Papa John's. According to transcripts of one of the meetings, Schnatter asked why Colonel Sanders could get away with saying the N-word, but he couldn't criticize the NFL and its players on a racial issue. Except Schnatter didn't say N-word. Forbes got a hold of the transcript and published their findings shortly after. The Forbes article went viral, and Schnatter resigned as CEO of Papa John's. However, Schnatter was still the majority shareholder of the company, so the other shareholders and board members eventually forced him to sell off his shares. Schnatter went from owning 30% of Papa John's to just 17%. The sale netted him $500 million, but lost him control of the company he founded all those years ago. Despite his sudden downfall, Schnatter is no stranger to controversy. In the late 90s and early 2000s, a woman accused Schnatter of stalking and harassing her. Then, in 2009, another woman accused Schnatter of harassment. Both cases were settled in a confidential settlement. According to reports, this type of behavior was the culture within the executive offices of Papa John's. Schnatter hired a team of executives who were known to spout misogynistic comments to female employees. And, according to some claims that can't be verified, Schnatter was the main contributor. He allegedly asked one female employee what her bra size was, and asked several female employees what they did with their partners in bed. He also allegedly harassed one of his male employees by telling him his wife was cute but could stand to lose a little weight. Schnatter, of course, denies all the allegations against him. After leaving the day-to-day operations of Papa John's to his successor, the company went through a culture change, but not for the better. Schnatter's replacements have created an even more boys' club type of culture at Papa John's. Many have reported an increase in vulgar remarks and harassment within the corporate offices. Since then, Papa John's has recovered and thrived during the pandemic, when millions of people were in sudden need of delivery services. The new CEO, Robert Lynch, has taken Schnatter's former company to new heights. He's bolstered their financial performance, improved product quality, and helped innovate their franchisee system. Click to watch one of these next videos, and let us know in the comments section what you would rather do. Support a company with bad products but a CEO you love, or support a company with great products but a CEO you hate.